Now, in the modernity, to create nations, intellectuals invented to the past people. Understand? To invent a French nation, it was necessary, to create a French nation, it was necessary to invent a French people till the beginning of the time, till de Gaulle or till Clovis. For 100 years, little Frenchmen studied that they are the right descendant of the Gauls. Nos ancêtres les Gaulois was the first sentence in a lot of books, history books in the schools. Nos ancêtres les Gaulois, notre ancestor les Gaulois. Jews started to write the history of the Jew from the Bible. My first chapter, after the theoretical chapter, is dealing the way that these intellectuals of the national intellectuals of the second half of the 19th century took the Bible as a basic to tell the history of the Jew as a people. And it was a new thing to do. You have to know that the Bible, that is not a book, it's a library, was not read by Jew. Everybody believes that the Bible is the book of the Jews, no? More or less? The first testament, not the second one. But do you know the Jewish in their yeshivas, in their rabbinic schools, didn't study the Bible. They didn't read the Bible. Jewish didn't read the Bible. They have no the right to read the Bible. Who read the Bible before the modern times? It was a very, very important Jewish sect that the name was Karaite. You know what is Karaite? Karaite. I think that in English we're saying Karaite, no? Karaitis. Karaitis is a very important Jewish sect. I don't know if to call it Jewish sect, monotheistic sect in Jerusalem, very, very strong. And they read the Bible as the first book of their identity. The second group that read the Bible before modernity was, where? Who? Huh? Protestant. They jumped on the Bible as the beginning of their religion, because they are the really children of Israel, you know, the Protestants. You know it. I believe that there are people here, really children of Israel, from Protestant origin, no? I don't see very clear, but I believe. I don't know how to define somebody that is a real Protestant. And even a Jew, I don't arrive to identify it immediately. Now, the Protestants were the second group that read seriously the Bible, and the third one was the Zionists. In the second half of the 19th century, at least from the end of this century, Zionists started to read the book not as a theological book, but as a historical book. You see, all my education passed in Israel. When I was 7 years old, I studied the Bible in a secular school, not in a religious school. I studied the Bible as what? As a history of my people, the Jewish people. You can imagine it, from 7 years old till the degree of the high school in the end, in 18, everybody in Israel is studying every week, before the English language, before mathematics, before history. It is the Bible. By the way, in last years, they decided to start it in the first class.
This is Jair David speaking to you from Jerusalem, the capital of Israel. Speaking to you from Jerusalem, and I'm speaking to you on behalf of Brit Am, Hebrew Nations, a movement that finds Celestian tribes amongst Western peoples. And now we're about to give an overview of our findings from the historical point of view. This is a continuation of a series And presently we're going to discuss the Scythians. The Scythians were a group of peoples who first arose in the Middle East, then they moved to southern Russia, then they moved to Western Europe. The Angles and the Saxons, the Frisians, different peoples in Western Europe gave rise to West European peoples are descended from the Scythians. From the Scythians also came a portion of the so-called Celtic nations. And we are about to show that the Scythians were descended from those 10 tribes. We have already shown that the Cimmerians, who were related to the Scythians, were also from the 10 tribes, or at least had a portion of the 10 tribes amongst them. When they first appeared, the Cimmerians and the Scythians were the one people confederated, joined together. When they first appeared in the Middle East, and when they were recorded by Assyrians, but the Assyrians recorded their presence and spoke of them. That is the first historical information we have concerning them, these reports of the Assyrians. And the Assyrians were the most powerful nation in the world at that time. The Assyrian Empire stretched over most of the Middle East area and also into Europe. The Assyrian Empire had conquered the land of Israel, and it had exiled 10 out of 12 tribes of the Israelite tribes. It had taken away the 10 northern tribes, 10 tribes from the 12 tribes of Israel. 10 of these tribes, that is the majority of the Israelite nation, they'd taken them away and transported them into different areas of the empire, and there they disappeared. They lost consciousness, they lost awareness of their ancestry. They disappeared from the eyes of history, from the eyes of contemporary reports. But nevertheless, there are indications that they did stay together. They remained as coherent bodies, as cohesive groups, joined groups that were together in one area, even though culturally they assimilated to the ways of the nations around them. And they in effect forgot their origins, they forgot the Israelite origins. We should remember that the time that they were exiled, they had already gone in the ways of the nations around them. From a religious point of view, they were no longer Israelites because they were worshipping idols, and they were copying the customs of the Canaanites, worshipping Canaanite gods, and they spoke a similar language to the Canaanites and taken on Canaanite practices. It was because of these sins, these transgressions, they were exiled. God exiled them. And the Almighty Himself said this, that they would forget their origins, because the divine purpose had a plan for them. There was a reason for them to be exiled, and there was a reason for them to forget who they were, because they were destined to go down to the level of the nations, of the Gentiles, of the non-Israelite nations, and then to evolve upwards with them and drag the rest of mankind along with them. And this is what they did overall. So now getting back to the Scythians, what happened to them? Who were they? Or how do we equate the Scythians with the 10 tribes? So first of all, we have Assyrian records. Suddenly Assyrian records start telling us of the Cimmerians. They tell the Cimmerians were settlers, were colonists of the Assyrians, and then they rebelled against the Assyrians, and the Assyrians fought wars against them. And then we hear, as a part of the Cimmerian Confederation, we hear of the Scythians. Then they were referred to as Ashkuzi, or different names, and but they were a part of the Cimmerian Federation. One of the names that they are known by is Isaac Guli, which in effect means the exiles of Isaac. Isaac was one of the forefathers of the Israelite nation. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were the ones who gave rise to the Israelite nations, and it was said as a blessing in Isaac will your seed be called, as if the name Isaac would be attached to the major portion of the Israelite nation, and this is one of the names we find attached to them. And the different variations of the Scythian names, such as Saka and Isaac Guli and so on, indicate that their name did derive from this term Isaac. We also find the Scythians, when they first appeared, together with the Cimmerians in the region of Manai, that is up around about Azerbaijan of today, in the related area, southwest of the Caspian Sea, present-day Iran, and northwest Iran, and so on. On the foothills of the Caucasian Mountains, this was the area of Menai. It had been prophesied by Amos that this is where the majority of the 10 tribes would go to. This is where we find the Cimmerians and the Scythians when they first appeared. We also find here the Zabatas River, the Sab River, and the Sambatai, which Sambatai gave rise to the legend of the Sambatian River, beyond which the sages of the Talmud said the lost 10 tribes were to be found. And later this name Sambation is also found in southern Russia, together with the Scythians, after the Scythians had moved to southern Russia. First they were in the Middle East, then later on, much later, they moved to southern Russia, and from there they moved to Western Europe. And the name of Sambation seems to have moved with them. And we find parallels between descriptions of the 10 tribes in the Bible and in Talmudic literature with the Scythians. And what is said about the 10 tribes in the Bible and in the Talmud and related sources describes what history tells us. Historical sources tell us about the Scythians. The Scythians are the ones who are doing what the 10 tribes are described as doing. And this confirms our identification of the Scythians with the 10 tribes. From Brit Am, speaking to you from Jerusalem, the capital of Israel. We are now about to discuss one more proof showing that the 10 tribes of Israel today, as recognizable bodies of cohesive groups, are to be found amongst Western peoples. That is where the lost 10 tribes are to be found. The descendants of the 10 tribes of Israel who went into exile and lost knowledge and consciousness of their identity are now to be found amongst Western peoples, and they will return, they will re-acknowledge their identity. It will be made known to them, and they will re-acknowledge it, and they will return to God Almighty and to the land of Israel when the time comes. In the meantime, they must know, they must be aware of their ancestry, and that is what we do. That's what our organisation, Brit Am, Movement of the 10 Tribes of Israel, does. It works to arouse and to inform those who are applicable, those who are pertinent to the subject of their ancestry, to tell them that they descend from the tribes of Israel. And we have numerous proofs of this. We have hundreds of proofs of this. One out of the very many proofs that we have concerns the actual name of these peoples in ancient times. Ancient times meaning less than 2,000 years ago, and sometimes much less than that, and they were known from the very beginning by these ethnic names, ethnic appellations, and these names are the names of the Hebrew entities, and they continue to hold these names, and these names prove that they are descendants of Israel, or they at least strongly indicate it. They are at least strong indications of this, and taken together with other evidence, the statistical probability is that these people are indeed the physical descendants of the ancient Hebrews who lost their identity, who lost consciousness of who they were and went into exile and moved in groups, in stages from the east to the west, and converged in Western Europe, and from there their descendants colonized and settled in North America, Canada and the USA, and also in Australia and New Zealand, South Africa and so on. So one of the proofs we have is the name Hebrew, the actual name Hebrew. Hebrew is an English word. It is a transliteration of a Hebrew word in the Hebrew Bible. It is transliteration of the word Ivri or Ibri. It can be pronounced either way. Either way is actually good enough, is correct enough. In modern Hebrew it is pronounced as Ivri, but Ivri is also quite acceptable, since the same letter, a bait or a vait, is used in both cases, and this letter may be pronounced either way according to the known phonetic general rules, which do not reflect on the meaning of the word. At all events, Ivri or Ibri in the Hebrew language, or Iberi, is another way of saying the word Hebrew. Hebrew is, in the Hebrew language, was pronounced or spoken as Ivri or Ibri. And now the ancient Celts, the so-called Celtic peoples who lived in first and Central Europe, they lived in Central Europe, but they expanded elsewhere. They also expanded into Western Europe. Eventually they the leadership, or the people who actually determined who they were. The Celts were a group of different peoples ruled over by an elite group of leadership, who these leaders gave them their language and their culture, made them who they were, and this leading element moved from the east to the west, eventually converging in Gaul, in what is now France and Holland, and then from there moving into the British Isles, into Britain and Ireland. And on the way, some of them, groups of them, also passed through Spain, and from Spain there too they moved to the British Isles and moved into Ireland and into Britain. And they call themselves, they did not call, they are known in historical sources they are known as Celts, or the Romans called them Celts, or Celti, or Galati, and other names, but they usually refer to themselves as Ivri or Iberi, meaning Hebrew. Meaning Hebrew in the Hebrew language, this means Hebrew. And we have in the Hebrew Bible, you have hundreds of examples where the Hebrews, ancient Israelites, call themselves Hebrews, and that was what they were known as. Genesis 14:13 and Jonah 1:9, Genesis 39:14, 39:17, and so on. Joseph refers to himself as a Hebrew. Jonah refers to himself as a Hebrew. Abraham is referred to as a Hebrew, and so on. And we find this word Hebrew is reflected. We have the expression Hibernia, or Hibernia for island. We have the Iberian Peninsula, the Iberian Peninsula, meaning Spain and Portugal together. And also the Hebrides, the islands. Hebrides, also the Heba in Hebrew, Ha-Ibri. It can be, it's the same thing. Ha-Ibri or Ha-Iberi or Iberi without the Ha sound is the same, because Ha in Hebrew means the. So they're quite acceptable one way or the other, and also we find both these variations in the names that the Celts have applied to themselves. They will either call themselves Iberi or Heberi or Ivri or Iveri, which is almost exactly the same as Hebrew. It is correct. They may have even spoken Hebrew tongue. And in fact, they did. It is known they did speak a Hebrew language. They must have done, because they came from the ancient Israelites. But I mean, even linguistically, it can be proved that their original tongue was a Hebraic language or something very similar to it. Linguistics have shown that the substratum of colloquial Welsh and Irish contained a Semitic-Hamitic element. In other words, a very similar mode of speech with the same grammatical principles as the Western Semites, as the Hebrews also spoke. And also we find a lot of words in the vocabulary. We also find signs of Hebrew connections. And this is accepted. The Hebrews, that the Celts call themselves Ivri or Iberi, is accepted by mainstream scholars, but they give explanations of their own. Some people say that it comes from a word root meaning mistletoe. Mistletoe is a type of a plant that grows on oaks, not an oak tree. It's like a parasite that grows on an oak tree, but it is very useful. The Druids, who were the ancient holy priests of the Celtic peoples, they thought it was sacred. There was something sacred about it. So apparently it was called by something similar to Ivri or Iberi. Some people say that the name comes from that. Others say it comes from a word meaning swine. Other scholars have different explanations. No one really knows. It doesn't really matter. The bottom line is that is what they call themselves. They call themselves Hebrew. They call themselves a word meaning Hebrew, or sounding the same as the word Hebrew in the Hebrew language. And this is an indication. Not only do we have and this is an indication, quite a strong indication in its own right. It is a proof. Might be an absolute proof. One could say it is a coincidence, or there's other explanations for it. Maybe there is, maybe there are not. In the meantime, the onus of evidence is on the other side. We have a claim. It is a claim for us. It is a claim strengthening us, and it strengthens the body, overall, the great body of evidence that we do have, proving our case in this direction. That these peoples were originally from Hebrews, so they were originally of Israelite descent. Not only that, we also have the very name. We also have other evidence of the same similar nature, related evidence. The word Hebrew The Hebrew, in ancient Hebrew, comes from the root Ava or Aba. And this means, Ava means the other side. It means over. That's where we get the word over in English.